we'll go ahead and jump right in. So today's family history session is on vital records. So thank you so much for joining this virtual event. And if you're interested in future types of programs like this, you can go to our website on our virtual events page to see what others we have coming up, or you can sign up for our e-newsletter to stay informed. And I would like to just do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type those in the chat box, and we will have some time at the end to go through all the questions and have a little Q&A. And there's also the link to the class handout that I put in the chat if you'd like to go ahead and view that. If you wouldn't mind muting your microphones during the presentation, just so we don't have any background noise, I would really appreciate it. And at the end, we can unmute and have discussion, and there'll be time for that. So first of all, my name is Shanna, and I'm the South Carolina Room Supervisor here at the Greenville County Library System. And I'm also going to be my own moderator today. So I'm going to try my best to keep an eye on the chat in case anybody's having any technical issues or can't hear me. But I'll also go through all the questions at the end. So we're going to go ahead and just dive right in. And I want to just talk about what I'm hoping to cover in the next hour here. So we're going to be talking about all different kinds of vital records and how that they can help us when we're doing our family history research. We're going to explore different ways to locate these records. I'm going to discuss when these records become publicly available. We're going to demonstrate a vital record search, at least one. Hopefully we can do more than that if we have time. But we are going to be focusing on South Carolina vital records and Greenville County vital records for this course. I will be talking about ways that you can find information for other localities, but my examples and the demonstration are going to be focusing on South Carolina and the Greenville area. And now, just for fun, I do have a poll. And it may seem a bit random, but it is going to tie in later. So I'm going to launch this poll, and we're going to just do a quick little trivia question here. And so this question is, what year was Shoeless Joe Jackson born? So famous South Carolinian and baseball player. And these are anonymous, but if you take a minute to just, if you know, you can put it on there or just take a guess. We have 1887, 1888, 1889, or unknown. We don't know. So if you wouldn't mind participating, I'll give it a few seconds to maybe think about it and choose what you think. And like I said, this may seem a little random, but it's going to tie back in later. So it's just for fun. But let's give it just a couple more seconds. So far we have 1888 and unknown. If anybody wants to choose 87 or 89. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. And like I said, just keep this question in mind, and we'll get back to this in a little bit. And hopefully it'll all make sense. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about what exactly are vital records. So vital records, when we talk about these, we are referring to the type of records that tell about a person's life. And there are different types of records. There's even more that would be probably considered vital records I didn't list here. But we are going to be focusing on the top three. We're going to be focusing today on birth records, and in particular, South Carolina birth records. And these were not required until January 1st, 1915 for South Carolina. So even though there can be birth information before then, it wasn't like mandated until the 1915. And then death records are the same situation. They were required by South Carolina also starting on January 1st, 1915. So there are some like other types of records where you can find death information, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but these are when they were actually officially required. And then for marriage records, we are talking about usually we'll kind of get into county versus state level records, but South Carolina didn't require marriage license until July 1st, 1911. And then the counties were responsible for marriage record collections. So we also have on this list adoption records and divorce records. And these two we're not really going to get into like the examples of today. We just don't have enough time. But if you go to your handout, there are some links for resources on this. South Carolina is a closed record state, so that does make getting adoption records a bit challenging. And divorce records, divorce wasn't legal in South Carolina until 1949. So if you have a relative and you're like, I know they had a divorce before then, you may look into states that would be considered like divorce mills, where people would go to other states to get their divorce. Nevada is one of the most well-known states, and Reno that did divorces. So there are records and resources for these two, but that's something we're not really going to get into during the class just for lack of time. We're going to focus on birth, death, and marriage, but on your handout, if you'd like to explore more about those two, you can look at those resources linked there. And before we kind of talk a little bit more, I wanted to just give a few tips up front. So when you are searching for records of your ancestor, you know, when you're getting into genealogy, one of the things that we always kind of give as a tip is to always like start with yourself and work backwards. So you're really starting with your most recent types of records, and then you're working your way back from there. And it's kind of similar with vital records. You may want to start with the most recent record that you might be able to find that's a vital record for your ancestor. So that would be the death record if they've passed. So you would want to search for your death record, and then the death record, you will find out, and I'll show examples, you'll find additional information usually for oftentimes your ancestors' parents, locations of where they died, but also sometimes where their parents were born and things like that. So that can really unlock clues that is going to help you when you search for other records. So maybe you go from the death record, then the marriage record, and then all the way back to the birth record. So you want to start with those kind of the records that are the most recent if you can. That's not always the way it goes, but sometimes that can be helpful and easier to find and work your way back and find those clues that can help you find those other records. And then my other tip is that, especially, you know, if you're searching for female ancestors, but also male ancestors as well, it is very helpful to search for all different types of name variations that you can think of. So when you're searching for your female ancestor, you want to search by her maiden name and her married name, as well as potentially any nicknames and things like that. So you want to exhaust all of that. So if you're not finding something, try all those different name variations to see if a record comes up that way. Okay, so what can these records tell us? So I kind of mentioned a few things already, but usually most of the vital records, those three big ones I mentioned, birth, marriage, and death records, they're usually going to include the full name of the person. Now, I do say that, but it doesn't always happen that way. And I'm going to show an example in a little bit of where that was the case. But oftentimes we get that first, middle, and last name, which is really nice. It's going to have the date of the event. So date a person was born, date they were married, or date they died, for example. And it's going to usually, you know, include the location of the event that took place. And it can often include other information such as names of family members. So oftentimes, of course, like birth records, we're going to have the name of the parents most of the time. You're going to have the names of potentially the informant on a death record, which we'll see, could be a family member, could be a neighbor, could be a friend, but it's often going to include additional names on these records of people who were around your ancestor. And then it can also include, like I mentioned, the name of the informant or burial location for those death certificates, burial location. For marriages, maybe even include like the pastor, which we may see, and maybe this is associated with the church that your ancestor attended. So all of these like different things can be clues to other information about your ancestors and ways to look for other records. And then, like I mentioned, it can maybe include birthplaces of family members too. And that can be on birth records, marriage records, death records. And it's going to depend really also on the state and the county and what their forms look like, what information was collected, and that can vary over time. So you may have a more simplistic type form, and then earlier or more recently, that might be a more extensive form. So one thing to really keep in mind as you are looking for vital records is to know, when do these records become publicly available? And like I said, that's going to vary by the state. And one way, on your handout at the very bottom on the additional resources, there's a family search wiki link. And that's really helpful if you want to just get a really good snapshot of what's available for a state or county. And when those records became available, you can go to that link and type in whichever state you're looking at. And I love that because it's just a really quick snapshot. Since we're focusing on South Carolina today, South Carolina birth records, there's a 100-year delay for privacy. So they're not going to be publicly available until then. Right now, we have records on Ancestry for birth records that you can get, which we'll kind of hopefully get to do a tutorial a little bit if we have time. Birth records for South Carolina, 1915 to 1920. It does take them a while to add the ones because you could also see 21 once they get those put up there, and hopefully more once they get them added. But right now, when I checked the other day, actually, no, it was I think it was to 1920 still. But then for South Carolina death records, it's 50 years of that privacy after the death, and then they will become publicly available. And these death records, which we'll kind of talk about too, is there's a few different places you can get information about a death in South Carolina. There's the Department of Health and Environmental Control, which keeps indexes for death records. We have the microfilm in the South Carolina room that we get a new roll each year as they become publicly available. And then Ancestry also has death records on their site. So the next one is Greenville County marriage license, which are public records, and you can go on their site, which we'll preview a little bit later. But there's 1911 to present, which you can search their index on the county site and you can order those. And then we also have microfilm of the marriage license from 1911 to 1995 in the South Carolina room. So there's a few different places depending on the record that you can get, and there's not always just one place to find these. So it's really what's most convenient for you. Some of these have fees if you needed to request one from DHEC, for instance, or you wanted a copy, and even Greenville County Marriages, they charge a small fee if you want a copy. The index is the only thing that's online for Greenville County Marriage License, and we'll get to look at all this a little bit later, but just wanted to put that in your mind that you want to see when these are publicly available. We do have sometimes people come in and they say, hey, I want to find the birth record for my ancestor, and they were born in 1930 in South Carolina. Right now, we do not have those publicly available. Now, that's not to say that you couldn't still get it. DHEC does have a way to order these online, and that if you are a direct relative, that you can look at their criteria that you need to meet in order to request a record, and you could prove that you meet that criteria, and then you could get the record that way. So we'll go over that as well. But just something to keep in mind as you're looking for the records. You don't want to spend a ton of time searching for something that's not out there right now. And then, as I mentioned, there's different levels. So you have the county level records versus the state level. And this is just kind of a quick snapshot of some of the things and where they are held. So I mentioned, like, we're not really going to get into the divorce records, but the Greenville County divorce records, that's, those are at the county level. But there's also South Carolina divorce reports that start in 1962 that are held by South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. And then you have your Greenville County marriage records, and you can request those through the probate office. But there's also marriage certificates starting in 1950, because county officials did begin sending copies to the state in 1950. So you could also decide to get those through the state instead. So it may vary on which one is faster if you really did need a record, whether you wanted to go through the county or the state. I do know that when I looked at the state's page the other day, it did look like you had to meet certain requirements in order to get the certificate. Whereas on the county, from what I can see, you don't have to prove that it's you and the marriage record or anything like that. You can just request records, and we can look at that too. And then, of course, the birth certificates and death certificates are held at the state level there for what we have from 1915 to present. And then also, like I said, there's ways you can view some of these records on databases like Ancestry too. But yeah, statewide registration of marriages began around July 1950. So the probate office for the whichever county and the state environmental health and control will have those. And let's go to our next slide. We're going to look at a couple of examples. And let me just, looks like the audio's dropping out. I'm so sorry about that. Are y'all able to hear me right now? If you want to just put in the chat or give me a thumbs up. Hopefully it's working now. Let me see, I may need to plug in. Try. Let me check and see. Okay, it looks like it's a bit sporadic. I don't know if anybody else is having trouble hearing me. I'm going to try to switch over. Maybe my internet settings. But just keep me posted. I'm going to monitor the chat. If it does drop out again, I can try plugging in a different microphone, and hopefully that'll help. Okay, so let me go back. The first one that we're going to look at today is a birth certificate example. And so I just wanted to point out a few things that you can see on this birth certificate, types of information that you can gather from a birth certificate. And so here we can see, and I know it may be hard to read because some of this is in cursive, but we have the child's name, which this is an example where the child does not have a full name. It's just listed as infant of Mr. and Mrs. Capps. So there can be a different number of reasons of why there's not a full name given, but this is an instance where the full name isn't there. I thought was interesting. But we do have that it was in Greenville. We also have that the address, the name of the father and mother, and we have the date of birth was December 15th of 1916. So this was just a year after the birth certificates started being collected by the state. It does list if they were like a multiple, a twin, or a triplet, then their birth order in the family. We also have the birthplace of the parents, which can be very helpful so that you could know where to look for other records for the parents. And we have their ages, so we can help, that helps us even calculate the parents' birth date, their year of birth. We have their occupation. Looks like the father was a shoemaker and the mother was a housewife. And it looks like there were 2 children born to this family. So we know there was a sibling at one point, but it looks like only one child at the time of this birth was living. We have the time of the birth and the signature there for the, let's see, state whether physician or midwife. And I did find the reason I think this record only included the name infant and not the full name is I ended up finding a death record for this child. They died shortly after birth. And I think that's why this didn't have a full name. There's also records that are called delayed birth certificates. I don't know if you've ever seen any of these for your ancestor, but delayed records are exactly that. They are issued after the event, so after the fact. And this example is from the physicist Charles Hard Townes, who was from South Carolina and born in Greenville. And you can see on here that this birth certificate was not issued until 1942, but he was born in 1915 on July 28th. So there could be several reasons why a birth record may be issued after the fact. So one, it could be that they were born before the state started requiring birth certificates. And keep in mind, even though they did start requiring the birth certificates in 1915, as well as the death certificates, it did take a while for full compliance. So I think I read that it was around 1918 where there was full compliance. Sometimes the record may have been lost or destroyed somehow. I had an ancestor where the record had been lost and they ended up having to get a delayed birth certificate. So just because you have an ancestor that was born, in South Carolina prior to 1915, that does not mean that they might not have some type of birth certificate. It may just be a delayed birth certificate, which is the case here. But once again, we have the mother's name, which we have the maiden name, which is very helpful. So we know his mother's maiden name was Hard, so Ellen Hard, and we have his father's name. And we also have their mailing address where they were in Greenville, or it says, where they were in Greenville, and we have their ages. And then we have their occupations. So this is a 1942 version of the birth record, but it is considered a delayed one because he was actually born in 1915. So usually when you have a delayed birth certificate, you have to have something that shows that the information here is true. So when I go to this next slide, you'll oftentimes see like an affidavit attached to the record. So for this particular example, it looks like the aunt and uncle of the ancestor was the ones that gave this statement, that they are saying that they had knowledge that Charles A. Hard Townes was born to Ellen Hard Townes in Greenville on that date. So that is their, sworn statement that this birth did take place on this date, and these were the parents, and that information is true. You'll notice that his middle name of Charles Townes, his middle name is Hard, which is also his mother's maiden name. So you'll see that oftentimes. So if you're not sure of the maiden name of a female ancestor, I just wanted to mention that sometimes if you look at that middle name, that can sometimes be a clue, especially if it's maybe a very uncommon sounding name. Like you may think, does this have some kind of family connection? So that's just one little other side tip there. So yes, but delayed birth certificates are out there. And so something to keep in mind if you have an ancestor that was, born before those records were kept, or officially required. And here on this next slide, we have examples of some marriage records. And these were taken from our microfilm in the South Carolina room. So the first one is an example of a marriage license. Like I said, it is a little bit difficult to read because it's in cursive, but I'll tell you what it says. So basically, you have the name, of course, of the bride and the groom here who were getting married, and then you have the date that they got their marriage license. We find that they both were residing in Greenville. And one thing, though, to keep in mind about the marriage license when you're looking at records for your ancestors is that just because a marriage license is found does not necessarily mean that they did get married. You want to look for that marriage certificate, which I have pictured on the right. And that is what you want to look for to make sure that they actually got married, because just because they filed with the license, they could have changed their mind. And I have seen that before, where there was a license, but didn't look like there was any other proof that the couple did get married. So look for the certificate as that proof that the ceremony actually happened, that they actually did get married. So on here, this is an actual marriage license from 13. So they had the license, and then the next day is when they were married. According to this, it's a bit hard to read, but you can see December 14th, 1913, they had their marriage license on the 13th. And then here we can see that it looks like B.B. Earl was the pastor. And like I mentioned before, this could also give us a clue. Maybe this was the pastor where they went to church. So we could even kind of look into that information. Maybe there's some church records available and we could look at that. So we kind of talk about the people associated in these records as your ancestors' fan club. So their friends, family, associates, neighbors. That can be very helpful to also look at those people, especially if you have more of an elusive ancestor where you're having a more difficult time finding information about them. Then you want to look at other people mentioned in these records that they spent time around, or people who knew your ancestor, because sometimes looking at records for those types of people will lead you back to records for your ancestor. And so here's an interesting example. So like I mentioned, it wasn't required until 1911 for those marriage records in Greenville and South Carolina. So this is an interesting one because it's a pre-1911 example here. And this is on our microfilm. We have a small roll of microfilm that's pre-1911. And so what I refer to as these, and I don't know, this is an official term, but I've been calling these almost like the delayed marriage records. Like we had those delayed birth certificates. These are marriage records. For most of the ones that I've looked at are ones where they took place prior to the 1911 requirement. This particular one is from 1903. And it's another type of kind of affidavit here where someone's appearing and they're saying that, hey, it looks like Jim Putman and Annie Young were married at this person's home, and they were married by Reverend Lucius Logan, and that Jim Putman, it actually says, had passed away, and that they had 3 or more children. And so this is sworn that, they were indeed married on August 21st, 1903. So this, and you may think, well, why do people need to get marriage certificate or or a birth certificate after the fact? Well, a lot of times, once Social Security came around, people needed to show birth records to get that. Just like any time today that you need to show your marriage certificate or your birth certificate, to get a passport or whatnot. When you were born before those were required, or you were married before those were required, you needed sometimes to get something like that, and you had to do it after the fact. So this is kind of an example of that someone had to go forth and say that this information was true in order for them to get their certificate. These are not in the index online. So we do have kind of a typed index in the South Carolina room. So if you ever are interested in, you have an ancestor that was pre-1911, like I said, there's only a small amount, but it might be worth checking and coming by to see if they are in one of these types of records on microfilm. So here is an example of a death certificate. And this is for Shoeless Joe, Joseph Jackson. So that kind of brings us back to our poll that we did in the beginning. And this is the example of some information, but there's other information out there about that's kind of different than what's on his death certificate. So the death certificate here states his name, and it states that he was born July 16th, 1889. But on his, there's other records out there, like his grave marker says 1888. If you look at the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum, they say 1887. And he was born prior to when the birth records were issued. I don't believe we have a delayed birth record for him. I don't think we might. I haven't searched for one yet. But all that to say is that different records have sometimes different information. And you really want to try, when you're trying to prove something, is get a record that's close to the event. So death is pretty far away from when he was born. So it may be less reliable than, say, another source. But one thing to look at here is who is giving this information. And we want to look for the informant, which was his wife, Katie Jackson, and she was the one giving this information. Sometimes you'll see on a death record that it could have been a neighbor even. It could have been another family member. So you want to think, how well did they actually know this person? Because sometimes they may not know. I mean, just think, would your neighbor know who the name of your parents? Would your neighbor know when you were born? You know, things like that. If they had to go down and get a neighbor to be an informant, or maybe a distant cousin or something, or even an aunt or uncle may not know all the details if they were the ones who were the informant. So you do want to take some of this information with a grain of salt, because it's not always 100% accurate. But this being his wife, we can gather that she probably did have pretty close knowledge about his father's name, of course, his mother's name, and even the birthday. So the year might be a little fuzzy, but you know, we have his age, we have what his occupation was at the time of death. He owned a liquor store here in Greenville. And then we also have some information about the cause of death here. And then the other interesting part, a lot of times on the death certificate, will be where they were buried. So we have Woodlawn Memorial Park, and then Thomas McAfee was the funeral home. And we do have some of the older Thomas McAfee funeral records in the South Carolina room. So that's just another thing. Like, you can take pieces from these records, and that can be a launch point for other places to look. So you may say, okay, what was the funeral home? Does that funeral home have records? Are they available to me to even get? The cemetery, maybe you want to take a visit to the cemetery, or use a website such as findagrave.com, which has online information about tombstones and things like that. And you could look, and sometimes people on Find a Grave will even add obituaries and other pictures and things that might also fill in the gaps of information. Okay, so that kind of just leads into additional resources that may help if you aren't able to find, say, a birth certificate, a death certificate, a marriage certificate. What other places could you look that are going to give you information about your ancestors' life? So one of the big ones is newspapers. And you can look for obituaries, marriage announcements, birth announcements in newspapers. So those can be a great place. And of course, obituaries especially can tell a lot of information. It's like a biographical snapshot. You may find who their parents were, what their occupation was, where they were living, what church they went to. There can be sometimes a ton of information in the obit. Church records, as I mentioned, can be another place to look. There are many churches that have church archives, and you may be able to find information on your ancestor if they were a member there. Census records are always a great place to look if you haven't already, and can really kind of go through the life of your ancestor. Family Bibles, a lot of times births before and deaths before they were required were just recorded in the family Bibles. I've seen family Bibles being used sometimes as proof of a birth when they didn't have any other proof. Military records can sometimes give that birth information, things like that. Other family members could be listed. Probate records, your wills and estate packets are a great place for information. We also have some indexes in the South Carolina room that are online for the obituaries, marriage announcements, news articles, things like that, that I'm going to demo a little bit later so that we can take a look. And we're actually going to go ahead and do that right now. We're going to explore how to find these records. We're going to kind of demo and do a search so that you can see. I am going to start, since we have about 20 minutes, which is really good. I'm going to start with the ones that you can access anywhere. You don't have to be in the library. And if we have time, I'm going to jump over to Ancestry.com Library Edition so that you can see the different types of records available on there. For Ancestry Library Edition, it is available at any library location, but you do have to be in the library to access it. So I just wanted to mention that. You won't be able to necessarily follow along with me. Yes, I did see in the chat that mentioned that KD mentioned that the wiki page for Shoeless Joe says 1887, but there's not really a reference provided. And that's what the museum's page says is 1887 as well. So always try, like that's good that you're looking to see if there's a source cited, because you want to know, like, where did they get that information? We see on that death record that's 2 years difference, and then you go over to say find a grave and there's a picture of the tombstone and it's different too. So it can be, sometimes you'll encounter that where there's conflicting information. So if you answered unknown in the poll, you are technically correct. But so what we're going to do is we're going to jump over. I'm going to, as I'm sharing my screen, if you want to follow along here, you can, or you can just watch. The handout that you have is going to be helpful too, because it links, if you go down to the bottom of the handout where it's additional resources, South Carolina Room Records section, we're actually going to go to the marriage index. So if you want to click on that, you can get there directly, but I'm going to go to our website and show you as well. If you go to greenvillelibrary.org, it takes you to the library's homepage, then go and navigate to Learning and Research tab at the top here. And we are going to go over on the right and click on marriages. That's the first one we're going to do. So when you click on marriages, you kind of have our page with all kinds of information and resources for marriages. So the first part is you'll see this little gray section is our index for marriage announcements from the Greenville News. Those are only from 1990 to present currently, and Town Magazine 2011 to present. And then we have a link though at the top here where you can search for marriage license from the Greenville County Probate Court. So that's what link we're going to go to. Before we do that though, I want to just show you, if you go down and scroll and look on this right side of the page here, there's some additional links. We have some links for the South Carolina DHEC birth certificates information page, the death index page. We also have another link to the marriage license. We have some historical newspapers links. And this one is for the South Carolina Electronic Records Archive. But the first one we're going to go to is this marriage license index. So this is where you can search to see if there is a marriage license. You want to put the applicant name. This could be either the bride or the groom. You do need to put the last name, comma, first, and middle if you want to put that there. You can simply put a last name like Smith. We can even do the year. You do not have to put the year. You can just search by that last name. It'll give you a lot of results if you just do Smith. But you'll see that if you do find a record that you want, they do charge different fees for certified copies. So we do have copies of the marriage license on microfilm. We don't provide a certified copy. So if you need a certified copy, you will want to go through the county's page here. But I'll show you how you could request a license in just a minute via our record request form. We charge $5. Of course, you could always come into the South Carolina room and pull it from the microfilm for free yourself if you'd like to do that. So let's just see if anything comes up. So I click search, and then you'll see we have 14 results for Smiths from 1911. And I want to mention something here. Greenville County does allow an opt-out option. So if someone says, hey, I don't want my marriage record to appear in this index, they can click on opt-out, and it takes, they say, at least 5 business days, but they can remove that person's information from the index. So if you don't see someone in the index and you know, hey, I'm pretty positive they were born in Greenville County, there's a chance that there is still one, that they're just not in this index because maybe they've opted out. If you needed to request a copy, you can click here and it'll take you to the page to fill out the form for that. But if you wanted to say, come to the South Carolina room, or you wanted to fill out the record request form that we have, and I'll show you that in a moment, there's a few things you're going to want to note. You want to note at least one ancestor's name here. So if you were Agnes Smith, for example, was your ancestor, you would want to note that name when you make your request, or when you come in, write that down, of course, which that's easy to remember. But you also want to know the date they were married, specifically the year, and then you want the license number. And the license number is this number that's after the dash in this column. So 1911, that's the year, dash 2731. 2731 is the license number. So you would want to write down or put this somewhere in your computer and bring it, a notebook, whatever. And let's say you wanted to come in to the South Carolina room, you could give us that and we could pull the roll of microfilm for you and walk you through how to locate that on the microfilm. Now, let's say that you're not from Greenville, or you can't get to the South Carolina room, but you still want this record. You don't need a certified copy, and you want to just have us do this. I'm going to go back to the page we had open. So this is just our Library Systems Marriages page, and I want to show you our record request form. So you can just navigate to Greenville library.org, or even from this marriages page if you're already there. You want to be in the learning and research section and go down to record request form. So click on record request form. It takes you to our page where you can do an online record request, because what we saw here on the previous page is just an index. The record itself is not online. So if you go to like our record request form, you can see we have different records available. You can click on Greenville County Marriage License. And then if you scroll down, it's going to ask you for your ancestor's name or the person's name. And you can sometimes, it's helpful if we know these information, but you do not have to put that in there. And for the marriage record, we don't need to know that, but you can add it if you do know it. And then you can tell us, do you want to receive it as a PDF, a JPEG, or we can mail you a physical copy. And then you'll also want to put in your information. And then you can pay online, and it does say pay with PayPal, but you do not have to have a PayPal account to do this. You can pay with a debit or credit card. Alternatively, if you would rather mail in a request form, there's a printable version you can mail in with cash, check, or money order. So that's just a way, if you needed the record like this, that you could use our record request form. But like I said, if you want that certified copy, you will need to go through the request option via the county's website. So here's just how you would do that. You would tell them the number of copies, and then you would fill out that information. So that is for a marriage search. And I'm just going to go ahead and close out of this. I wanted to just note, I'm not going to have a chance, because we are getting close to time, I'm not going to have a chance to show you this, but I'm going to the handout here. And I wanted to show, if you go to the marriage section, there is a browsable index for 1927 to 1995 on the county's website. So if you didn't see it in the index that we just did, and maybe somebody opted out, you might check the browsable index just to see if it's also missing from there. That can just be another way to check to see if maybe there was a license for Greenville. Okay, so the next thing I want to show while we have time is I want to show a death index search. So from here, I'm actually going to go back up to this learning and research tab on the library's page. And we're going to go down and click on obituaries this time. So this is all linked in your handout, but you'll notice on our obituaries page, we do have a obituary search that you can do for Greenville news 1901 to present. So like I mentioned, obituaries can be great if you can't find the death certificate, or sometimes people want both. You want to see if there's a death certificate and an obituary. If we have time, we can do an obituary search here. But the main thing I wanted to mention is the Department of Health's index for deaths from 1915 to 1970, which they may have updated that now to more recently. But you can click on this, and this page still says 67, but they do have more than that because of the 50 years. They now have added more, but they haven't changed this. But there is a way to search the index online, so you don't have to be on Ancestry or anything like that. You can access this anywhere. And to do this, they have some codes that you're going to see on the death indexes. So you may need to refer back to these codes, and we can show it in a minute so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. But you also kind of have to know when your ancestor died or close to it, because they divide it up into sections. If you were searching for someone who died from 1915 to 24, you'll need to search by their last name and click on the section. It'll pull up a PDF index. And then if it's 25 to 34, this is the index here. And you keep scrolling down, and then at the very bottom of the page, there's the more recent index, 1950 to, it says 61, but like I said, they actually have more in there than it's showing. I'm just going to click on S. When you click on S, you're going to get a ton of results for all the names that, surnames that ended in, that start in S from 1950. And you can even see there's 1970 right there. But we can choose to search by the descendant's last name. So let's say we wanted to do Smith. At the bottom here, you click locate. Then it's just going to show you Smith. Unfortunately, you can't put in the first name. You do have to it only does the last name. So what you'll see is a lot of these do not have a first name. Oftentimes, these are ones that were babies. You can see like this code 8 means hours at the time of death. So this would be a child that passed at 5 hours old. 7 is days at the time of death, and 5 is years. So when you see 7 and 8, that is a person who did not live very long. So if we go kind of, I'm going to just click page 10, for example, you'll start to see first names, and you could scroll through until you find your ancestor. So you're looking at the first name field, middle name is sometimes given, if they're male or female, the date of death, the race, age, which like I said, it's going to have a code before the age. So the code 5 means years, and this person was 67 at the time that they died. And it does give you the county of where they died. So if you were to come in, like I said, we do have the death records on microfilm. We do have 1971 and 72 will be available soon. They are still being processed, but we just received those recently. So currently we have 1915 to 1970 on microfilm. And what you could do is if you found a record, like say this one from 65, you could write down the person's name, of course. You want to know the date of death, particularly the year, and then the certificate number. We will need the certificate number in order to locate it on the microfilm. So this is a way that you could search the index. If you find someone, then you could come by the South Carolina room, or like I said before, you can use our record request form, and you can then go down and say you want a South Carolina death certificate, and you could fill that out. Once again, these are just copies from our microfilm. The South Carolina Department of Health, which is where this index is held, also has ways to request these. So I'm just going to click on that really quickly, just kind of get to their menu here. And I have it on your handout, but there's a vital records link. And it's say you were looking for a death certificate. You have different ways to request the death certificate on their page. You can do it online, by phone, you can go in person to Columbia, you can mail and drop off. This gives the fees. And then if it's not a publicly available death record, there's going to be some things that you have to provide in order to get it. So their forms will tell you everything that you need. Right down here, it tells you who can obtain a death certificate. So just something to keep in mind. And we only have a little bit of time left. So the last thing I'm going to show today is just a quick, let's do a quick obituary search as well. So from our page, let's say you found the death certificate, but you also wanted to check to see if there's an obituary. You can search by the last name. And of course, first name, I'm just going to do something generic that I know is going to pull up. And then you could select a year. I'm just going to do 1960. You can add additional information, but I usually say in our obituary search to just keep it nice and broad at first, unless you get a ton of results. And because if you refine it too much, you may not get a match. You just click search. And then we have 2 John Smiths for 1960. And if you find the record that you're looking for, you can actually then click on it, and then it takes you to the record request form if you'd like to order it from us. Once again, we do have the Greenville News on microfilm too. So you could come in and look that up on microfilm for free. If you'd like for us to do it for you, then you can fill out the record request form, and it's $5 for an obituary. Let's see, we actually do have a little bit of time. I'm going to just show you how to get to Ancestry's database if you were in the library at any of our branches and you wanted to take advantage of Ancestry searches. This is great if you have other states that you're looking for death certificates or birth certificates and whatnot, but they also have the South Carolina one. So from our page, if you go to Learning and Research and then do online resources by subject, go down to genealogy, and this is linked on your handout directly. Then you can scroll down, you'll see all of our databases. You'll see that Ancestry Library Edition is in library use only, so you won't be able to follow along with me here, but I just want to show you really quick. Once you get to Ancestry Library, what I like to do, I like to go up to the search field and then click on the card catalog option. You could also just click on birth, marriage, death, but I like to do card catalog. And then from there, I like to go to this birth, marriage, and death filter and click on that. You can then choose birth, marriage, or death. Let's do birth. You can then filter by location. So let's keep it with South Carolina. We're going to do USA. We're going to go down and find South Carolina. You could even refine it by year, but this will give you any types of records that are birth records that would be pertaining to South Carolina. So the main one is this South Carolina U.S. births. 1915 to 1920. So this is the birth certificates where you could search by name here, or you could choose to browse by year. And as they are able, they'll upload more. So that's just a way. And then they also have the South Carolina death certificates. So Ancestry has a lot of other collections pertaining to birth and death records and marriage that if you have a chance to come by, that can be a great tool to look at as well. So let me just switch back to our slide as we end here. I always want to conclude and just say that please stop by and visit the South Carolina room if you are able to. You can make an appointment and we'd be happy to put things aside, but you are definitely welcome to just drop on by. We're open the same time as the rest of the library here at the Hughes main branch. Like I mentioned, you can do online record requests if you'd like for us to pull a record and send it to you. And we say give us 5 business days, but like I mentioned, we're usually a lot quicker than that to get that record to you. And we have lots of different resources that you can find in the South Carolina room. Okay, and so yes, there is a question in the chat that is South Carolina room only on the main branch. And yes, that's correct. So the South Carolina room is the genealogy and local history room, and we are located at the Hughes Main Library, which is at 25 Heritage Green Place near downtown Greenville. However, any of our branches have the Ancestry Library Edition and all the genealogy databases. So you could go to any branch if you just wanted to take a look at Ancestry, and you could use that there. If you want more specialized genealogy help, we do have a Book a Librarian option, and you can spend about an hour with one of our staff members in the South Carolina room, and we can help get you started on family history research. And those appointments are definitely geared towards beginners, but you can do that. I'll put a link to that, but it's on our website under services, and you just click on one-on-one help. But I will put a link to that in the chat in case anyone is interested in scheduling a one-on-one and visiting the South Carolina room. Let me do that to everyone. Sorry, I think that only sent to one person. There we go. But that's a great question. And let's see. While if you're thinking of any other questions, we still have a few minutes and I'll answer some, but I just want to mention that we will be meeting in person here at the Hughes Main Library on Thursday, July 27th from 4 to 5 p.m. in the training lab, which is on the first level. We'll be doing Family History Club. And this has been a while since we've met in person, but we'll be meeting and going over some of the genealogy resources at the library. There'll be time to practice with Ancestry, or if you want to bring some things that you've been working on, I'll be doing this session and you can ask me questions. And it's just really a great time to just meet and work on family history and learn about some of the resources we have and get help. So definitely check us out and sign up for that. I'll go ahead and get you the link to register, because you can go ahead and register online if you would like to come by for that. But I don't see any other questions. And yeah, thanks so much for attending, and hope that you'll visit us in the South Carolina room or get to attend some more programs, and keep tuned into our future virtual events as well. So thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. And I'm going to go ahead and stop our meeting now. Thanks so much.